Welcome to the Stop Over Drinking and Start Living podcast, where high-achieving, goal-oriented rebel women come to learn how to live a vibrant and fulfilling life without requiring alcohol to get through it. No labels, no judgments, no saying you'll never drink again. Just real proven methods to help you stop rebelling against yourself with alcohol so you can drink less and do more. I'm your host, Angela Mascenik. Let's dig in. Welcome to episode 249, a special guest interview with Kristi Coulter, author of Exit Interview and Nothing Good Can Come From This. Oh my gosh, you all are in for a very special treat. I'm going to keep this introduction short, but I am so excited about interviewing one of my favorite authors, Kristi Coulter. Kristi wrote one of my favorite drinking books called Nothing Good Can Come From This a few years ago. And she just released her latest memoir called Exit Interview, The Life and Death of My Ambitious Career. And she was an executive at Amazon for a while, and this is her report of her time at Amazon. And I'm super excited to interview her on the podcast today. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Kristi. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I have a whole list of questions. Audience, I thought I would just give you a little background on how I came to know Kristi. Kristi, one of my friends who actually I've been friends with since high school, shared your It's Anjali article with me. Is that how you pronounce it?
Anjali is how I used to hear it.
Okay.
In the commercial. Yeah. French.
Yeah. So she shared that article with me, I don't know, probably, I think in 2018. Was that when
Probably it would have been, around then.
Yeah, that's when I stopped drinking, and she thought I would find that interesting, and I'm like, oh my God, that is interesting. And I'm going to link all this up in the show notes for y'all that are listening too. But then you published your book, Nothing Good Can Come From This, and it's your I describe it as a book of essays around your relationship with alcohol. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, that's, in fact, when we were packaging it, we called it like an essay collection about drinking and not drinking. So it's, exactly.
Yeah. So that is one of my favorite books to recommend. And I just love the cover art. And if you're not, you're listening to it, but it's like literally like not even a little bit can come from this. Yeah. Like, so just, if you're not seeing this, it's a picture of a wine glass and there's like I don't know, what do you call that? A scale?
It's kind of like, have you ever had wine like in the UK? Like in the UK, they often in bars have these little measures on there.
Yeah, it's like the side of a measuring cup, right?
Yeah. So if it's like a 5-ounce pour, they give you exactly a 5-ounce pour.
Yeah. And then you have the very bottom of it filled in with which looks like liquid, and then nothing good can come from this. And it's just such a good graphic representation.
Book covers are notoriously hard to get right. And so I was braced because I've worked in publishing, and the first ideas came in and there were like 4 and they were all great. But that was the one that my editor, me, my husband, the friends I talked to, we all were like, that's the one. And they got it on the first try. It was,
it just lands. It's just like, it just tells the whole story. Yeah.
It really does. Yeah. I don't think I'll ever have it that easy again with the book cover. That was the easy one.
Yeah. And then I actually took a writing class from you, I think through the Hay House on addiction. A few years ago. Yeah, I think it was during the pandemic, actually, in 2020. It was.
That's right. And that was just a 1-session class, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm teaching that now. Occasionally it's like a 4 to 6 session thing, and it's turning out. That was like my little trial run for like, is this anything? Yeah. And I love teaching my class.
That was so good. I wrote about, I remember there were several writing prompts, but the one that stuck out the most in my mind was, I wrote about the tea that I drank every night when I stopped drinking. And I got so detailed. It was Harney and Sons decaf Paris tea. And I just really developed this very strong relationship with that tea. And like, I give that tea out to my clients now. Like, it's like when I smell that smell of that tea, it's like, it's just so loving and comforting and amazing. Like, it really helped me.
Smell is like the sense that's most associated with memory, I guess. Like it unlocks neurologically all this stuff. And I also think that when we went, like, I know when I quit drinking, what I replaced it with was like very important to me. Like I was making these very elaborate mocktails at home. And now I don't care. It's like, do I have a Diet Coke? Great.
Right, right.
But it was like, that ritual. And tea is great because my husband's become a tea person in the last 2 years. And like, you can go down the rabbit hole.
Oh my
of tea.
Gosh, I know.
It's kind of like, it's like a cult almost.
I know. And honey. So like I have this whole idea, like I have a subscription box. It's actually a stopover drinking support kit. So like it's got a book, a journal, teas, non-alcoholic beverages, like all these nice little things in there. And I'm like, I could just have a tea and honey kit, like, and just like go through all that. Like that would be super fun.
Just honey. Seattle's one of those towns where people are into artisanal everything, but everyone, it feels like everyone had like urban chickens a decade ago. Now people want to keep bees.
It's honey. It's crazy how trends. Yeah. I was just in Savannah and did a honey tasting. So anytime like there's a tasting, like something that would be like a wine tasting, I'm like, I can go to a bar and like taste honey or smell perfume or something else that's like so much way better. I did
olive oil once. And it was really fun. And actually different olive oils are, they're pretty different from each other.
They are. Same with honey. It was quite fun.
I wondered about that. I actually was saying to my husband recently, like, we should do it. And he was like, oh, it was salt. I was like, we should do a tasting. And he was like, really? Should we do a salt
you wrote a little bit about that in your latest book. You're like, you got into flaky salts. And I was like, yeah. And didn't you make your husband didn't you make him try that?
I haven't yet. I guess I should just keep threatening him with it, I guess.
I feel like that needs to be a whole story.
People are so into like, oh, there's the pink Himalayan salt and the this and the this. And I'm like, are they really different? Like I would need an expert to tell me. Because to me, they're salt.
Yeah, it's just salt. Cool. So anyway, I've been following you and reading all your things. And when you launched or pre-sold this, I bought a copy of it. And, you forget about it. It's like 6 months in advance or something that you buy a copy. And then it came and I was just super excited. And then I heard you did another podcast on another woman who coaches around drinking. I'm like, I'm going to ask. And then here you are. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah. So the book that is, I really want to kind of dive into is called Exit Interview. Obviously you know that, but it's titled The Life and Death of My Ambitious Career. And so I just wrote some, questions and want to dive into certain aspects. But I think the very, very beginning is really where I'm grabbed. I'm just like I feel a little bit of the ragey anger kind of start coming in chapter 4, which is titled Event in the History of Female Employment. And you did that timeline that you opened up that chapter with was profound because you have, you're a few years older than me, not much, but you've lived through some significant changes, abortion rights being there and then taken away, right? You were around, as a young child when female women got the right to open up their own credit cards and their own bank accounts. Like, how can this be in our lifetime?
Well, that's what astonished me. So I was writing the book and it's a memoir, but I wanted to have some way to like ground it in like in the culture, and I started looking at these things and I was amazed because, when I think I was 6 when women could apply for their own credit card without a male co-signatory. And I just thought, like, was this possible? I think Roe v. Wade was passed when I was 3. I was born in 1970. So it was a way of making me aware of how tenuous women's rights are. And just the first Supreme Court justice, the first vice presidential candidate. And then also, just how I think younger women, when they read this book, I know when I was like 20, I was very complacent about women's rights. I was a feminist, but I also thought, it's going to be different for me.
Right.
And I am sure young women feel the same way because of course they do. And so a little bit is me now being the older woman being like, no, 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 Missy.
Yeah, it can be taken away from you, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, we're
Yeah.
experiencing that right now, right?
Yeah.
No, I think that's really important to highlight to my listeners too, to help them have some context of the systemic issues of gender inequality. Because if you just focus on what we have right now in this moment, you're
Right.
like, it's fine. You know, like
Yeah,
the pay gap
exactly.
is smaller, and more women have better jobs, and more women run their own businesses, and all these things. But like, it wasn't that long ago that we had to make laws to make our rights not even that equal, to be honest. Like, it
Yeah, I
sucks.
mean, marital rape was legal in some states until it's in the book, but I think until like 2003 or something. I mean, it's,
Wow.
there's this, and of course it's like, I find anti-feminists will sometimes say, what, would you rather go live in Saudi Arabia? And it's like, no, of course this is a relatively decent place to be a woman, but yeah, it's not, we have settled for, crumbs basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to read the definition of gender inequality for everybody who doesn't know. Because, I always
Yeah,
assume that everyone's on the same page, and then I'm
sure.
sometimes very mistaken by that. So, gender inequality is discrimination on the basis of sex or gender causing one sex or gender to be routinely privileged or prioritized over another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to read that definition because it doesn't mean that, gender inequality doesn't just mean that I don't get a promotion.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that women are always right. I mean, women
Mm-hmm.
can be evil, women can be incompetent, of course. It
Yeah.
just means that it's when it's a gendered reason that
Right.
someone is rejected, that's the inequality. When like your
Yeah.
femaleness is the primary cause.
Right. Yeah. So, one of the other things that really called out when in that timeline was that you actually played a board game called Career Girls. And
Yes.
you said the job, so you explain the board game in your words.
Yeah, so this is a board game. It actually predated me a little bit. I think we got it at a garage sale. And it's just a board game where you just move your little token around. And the idea is to figure out what your career is going to be. And there were 6 options, and they were like stewardess, nurse, teacher, actress, model, and ballerina.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
those were the 6 options. And you would draw cards that would eliminate you or qualify you. And I think for like 4 of them, it said, oh, you're overweight, so you can't be like 4 of these
Oh
things.
my God.
And it was just the most bizarre thing. It was like, I'm playing this in the 70s. I knew I was kind of hate playing it the way people hate watch things.
Yeah.
But I also was enthralled by it. And it's amazing to me that, this game was made in the 60s and that these were the options they presented. There was also a version for boys, and their options were like senator, astronaut, scientist. I mean, like
Wow.
actual jobs that you might want to
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
And, like ballerina for girls, like virtually nobody is going to be a ballerina. I mean, a lot of it has to do with how your skeleton develops. I mean, it's just,
I mean, yeah, like that there's an actual overweight card
yeah.
that is a
I think,
risk. If you're overweight, you are at risk of eliminating half of the 6 jobs or whatever
yeah.
that you could
It
have
even
in
like
your life.
teacher or something. It was like, it wasn't just ballerina and model. It
Yeah,
was
I
also
wrote
like,
model, actress, nurse, teacher, stewardess, and ballerina.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was, and it was just this really, or it's like you're unpleasant or and so you'd eventually land on this job. And so I was thinking about it when I was writing the book, and I just Googled it because I was like, am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah.
And yes, and I actually found one on eBay, and I ordered it. I
Oh
was
my
just, I have to
God.
have this. And so I own this game now, and it's awful. And they actually did do an updated version later, that was, like a little more, I think it's probably still not aspirational, but
Right.
less overtly sexist.
Yeah. It's just the
But
conditioning that started for people.
mhm.
Like, did you know then like, it sounds like, like, that's not right.
Something was wrong. Like that that, like, I grew up in a house where, like, my mom didn't work outside the house very much. Like, she had put my father through graduate school, but he was a professor, a tenured professor, and she stayed home. And so it wasn't like I had that living role model, but I definitely knew this was strange. Like, it was always assumed in my house that I was going to college. I think it was assumed that I was going to grad school. I think I would have gotten in trouble with my parents if I had not gone to grad school, and that I was going to have a job. Like, it was never, no one ever said anything about getting your MRS degree or we want you to get married and have babies as soon as possible. So I was clearly getting, the right messages in some way. So yeah, I do remember thinking, like, isn't there anything else? I mean, my father was a scientist and a professor. So that was my image of work in some ways, was what he did.
Yeah. But just the whole overweight card is probably more mind-boggling to me than the career limitations, because I'm just like,
I mean,
that is just like, okay, so yeah, you are just really not qualified for shit unless you're skinny. Which is like the most important thing you could ever be, is just thin.
Oh yeah, and that was certainly, I mean, in the 70s, there was no sense of like fitness. It was basically like, how thin can you be? I was joking with my husband recently because we lift weights together, and I said, in the 80s, like, we would do the Jane Fonda workout, and there'd be a part where you get out the 2-pound weights and you do your bicep curls. And, Jane Fonda looked great, and she was fit. But I mean, it was always about, like, can you be fit but also be as tiny as possible?
Yes.
And it was, and I think I went on my first diet when I was like 11. Like,
I was
I put
8.
myself. You were 8.
Yeah, I was put on a diet by my parents when I was 8 years old, and I had to do Nancy Reagan workout videos before school. Do you remember that? It was on like live TV.
That's amazing.
Terrible.
I wonder, do you listen to Maintenance Phase?
No.
It's one of my favorite podcasts. It's this woman, Aubrey Gordon, who used to write under the pseudonym Your Fat Friend.
Okay.
And she is a self-described fat woman. And then it's Michael Hobbs from You're Wrong About. And it's all about the diet industrial complex. So it's everything from real deep dives into, like, well, are carbs bad for you, to they have this series on celebrity workout programs.
Wow.
And I don't think they've done that one, but like, they did Angela Lansbury's diet and fitness book, which they honestly kind of loved. They were like, this one's really about living your best life and taking bubble baths and being sexy. But Angela Lansbury's, basically, her workout is kind of standing there in a sweater, kind of just lifting her arms a little bit. I remember I had a friend who in retrospect she was a ballet dancer. In retrospect, she was clearly anorexic, and she was on the Pritkin diet, which was this medical diet involving like no oil and no carbs. I mean, and I remember going on that. I was like, well, I'll go on that, because clearly and I was a fairly thin child, but it was all about how much more can you get rid of, It's just terrible.
It's so terrible. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight to our listeners that it just starts this systemic gender inequality, all body shaming, all this stuff starts so early and way before our time, and it all plays into what you get into in the book. I think Amazon was just like throwing gasoline on the fire of all of it.
Exactly.
Right? Because it was so many people in such a condensed thing and it grows so fast that it just really highlighted all of the issues.
Oh yeah. It all starts when you're really young, and it plays into what you believe you deserve and what you believe you can do. And
the other really big shocker of that, it's actually none of it shocking when I was reading it. It just ignited this sleepy rage that I think I had inside of me, which whenever I read this shit, I'm like, it sucks. But anyway, I'm sorry that you had to go through all of that, first of all, and then rewrite that. But thank you for doing that as well.
You're welcome. I mean, in the end, I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. So you wrote about this time when you were assaulted in 6th grade. By a boy who pushed you up against the wall and put his hand down your pants, and then you went to report him, and the first thing they fucking asked you is if you had a hall pass.
Yeah. And I, at that age, I was furious. Like, I certainly knew enough to know that was not the question you ask someone who's just been, I wouldn't have known the phrase sexually assaulted, but we would have said felt up in like 1981.
Right.
And yeah, they said, did you, because I had gone to my locker, gone to the restroom or something. And it was like, well, what was she doing wrong? Let's figure that out first.
Yeah, that's exactly what I write. It's more conditioning that when it's our fault when things go wrong. I mean, that's what I received from a very young age. You don't like something, you speak up. How is that your fault?
Exactly.
And I feel like that is the thread too that came through with Amazon, of that whole, whatever that term was, about how you have to be self-reflective.
Oh yeah, vocally self-critical. Yeah. And then if you are, though, then it's like, well, you're too vocally self-critical. There's no right amount to be.
No. Yeah. It's just, like, the whole, if women get raped or sexually assaulted as an adult too, it's like, well, what was she wearing? Or how was she out late at night? Was she alone? It's like, those are the wrong questions.
Yeah, they're not relevant. And then we also say, well, why did she take so long to come forward for women who don't come forward? And
because of this shit. Because you are blamed. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you have to go through the ringer to make anybody hear you. And it's not fair.
And there's one cause I really follow is so there's like something like hundreds of thousands of untested rape kits sitting in police locker rooms around America. So when a woman does report, it takes like 4 to 6 hours to collect evidence from her body.
Yeah.
On a day when she's already been raped.
Exactly.
So people do all this work and all this painstaking collection. And then a lot of police departments, they don't process the DNA until they have a suspect. So they're losing, and there's Mariska Hargitay from Law and Order has this foundation now that is fighting to change this. Wow. And they found that when they actually just process the fucking DNA, it actually, guess what, leads them to rape suspects.
Wow.
Because people don't tend to, it's a relatively small number of men doing a lot of the raping. And so, a woman comes forward, does everything right. And then here in Seattle, there was a girl who was raped at 12. It took them 12 years to process that DNA. And then they caught her rapist, and he had raped like 10 other people in the intervening decade and committed, a ton of other crimes, property crimes, violent crimes. And I just thought, what about all the suffering that could have been avoided if this child could have, been respected?
Right.
So, yeah, that's a tangent, but
no, thank you. I think it's an important thing to discuss, because it's just, the theme here is like, we're just not listened to and we're not heard, and that has real impact on our society and our health.
It really does. And we have the means to fix it. I mean, there are a lot of states are now passing laws that you have to process these DNA samples within a year or something. And things are starting to move, and there's all this data showing that it catches criminals. Like it works. But it's understandable to me that somebody might just say, well, why bother reporting when nothing's going to happen?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well, you wrote in chapter 10, I'm calling it To Be a Woman in the Workplace essay, but you called it professional help.
Oh, yes.
And that's, I think people are comparing it to the Barbie speech and things like that. But I didn't know if you would be willing to read that for us.
Sure. Let me just actually, I think I have it on my phone. You know what? I'm going to grab a copy of my own book.
Yay.
Yeah. Did you want me to read the first one?
Yeah, the first one. On page 97.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So this is chapter 10, professional help. By day, I learn Amazon. And at night, I seek out articles and listicles and TED Talks on femaling in the business world, just in case there are tips or hacks or something that could help me do it better. This is how I know I should lean forward in my chair far enough to show warmth, but not cleavage, but also sit with my shoulder blades against the chair back and my feet on the floor. That I should stand with my hands on my hips, but never cross my arms. Make eye contact for at least 2 seconds, but never more than 5. Look at a man's forehead and eyes, aka the business triangle, but never his nose or mouth, the social triangle. Listen with attentive interest, but without nodding or tilting my head. Speak naturally, but never end on an upswing. Speak assertively, but don't interrupt. When interrupted by a man, insist on finishing my thought, but charmingly, so he won't feel as though he did anything wrong. Don't volunteer to take meeting notes because it will seem secretarial, but do volunteer to take meeting notes because it's the only way to make sure my contributions will be captured. Do negotiate for more money, but don't let on that money motivates me. Be an advocate for women at work, plural, but not myself as a woman at work, singular. Always take credit for my accomplishments, but also let my accomplishments speak for themselves. Raise my hand for new assignments to be helpful, not eager. Dress to embrace my femininity, but also to de-emphasize my boobs, shoulders, waist, hips, legs, lips, and hair. And smile, but not too much, less. Yes, like that. Now hold.
Damn.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I remember just reading all these books. There were books like Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office, and they were all full of these well-intentioned tips for women, and everything contradicts everything else.
Yeah.
And also, like, men don't have to, I mean, we all get the advice about, standing tall and things, but men aren't told like how to tilt their heads or whether their tone of voice is right. They can just exist
right
in the office.
Yeah.
You
can
don't
just
have to
be
think
who
about
they
like,
are.
well, just do your thing, put on some clothes and go to work. It's fine.
Yeah.
And I started to think, and I find it kind of funny, this idea of like don't look at a man's nose and mouth, like what?
Yeah.
And I've had men read the book and say women are getting this advice. Like, this is crazy. Women are getting this advice.
Well, it's not. Sometimes it's not even just like it's not so explicit either. I mean, we're conditioned to have these thoughts and these rules, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just insane that you have to be a robot,
Yeah.
And it's still never enough. It's just never enough.
Right.
You can act, you can do all those things, and it's still like, but you didn't do it that way, and you're screwed.
Right. You did something wrong. And I go on in the book, there's 2 more iterations of this chapter where the original text is crossed out and replaced with, because it's reflection of me getting to be like, wait a minute, you're not going to win. So you can just give up. You don't have to play by these rules because they're not going to save you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for reading that. I think it was very good. And it could be a standalone thing, but I think it's exactly where it is in the book is perfect because you go in with all the history and like this background information, and then you show up at Amazon and play all these things. And
and it's interesting too, because Amazon is, a very informal workplace in its way. And I imagine for women in professions like banking or law, where people are still wearing suits. I mean, Amazon's the kind of place where like, you would see men in skirts. I mean, it's just anything goes. The dress code is literally wear clothes. Like that's it. It's 2 words. And yet these things still play out.
Right.
So I
like that wouldn't be okay for you, right? To just wear whatever the fuck you wanted, right? You couldn't show up in a tube top in a leadership position, right? No.
My spangled tube top. It was funny. I used to always notice that like the women were just always more dressed up than the guys. I mean, it's a jeans workplace, but the women would be in like jeans, dark jeans and a cute blazer and, heels and the men, I mean, especially the young developers, I mean, they sit in cubes all day, but they would like literally be in pajamas sometimes.
Yeah.
And I thought, this just would not, for a woman trying to be a leader, like that just would not fly. There'd be no rule she'd broken, but it would just be like, that's,
must not be you must not take this too seriously. Must not care too much, right?
Right. Does she value herself? Does she care about herself? It would have looked very, very strange. So I'd be in these meetings with senior executives, and there'd be 20 people in the room, 3 women, 17 men. And the men would just kind of all be in like, they had their button down and their dad jeans on. And I was like, and the women are always beautiful. And it was like, the women they're just done. They just look amazing. And it was just interesting that it was always that way, that the women clearly felt they had to make that extra effort. And of course, this is the kind of environment we were all making enough money that, if you wanted to do fillers and injectables and things like that, like the cash was there.
Right.
And it was interesting to be like, why do the women look so much better than the men? Like, always.
And but when you're unaware of these types of things in the workforce, I mean, it sounds like you're very aware, right? Like you're smelling the system as you're like in there and feeling this out and experiencing it. But for women who aren't, what's that like for them to just like, I have to play this role, and like they give themselves all these rules that they have to do and to keep up and all the pressure that stands. You know what I mean?
It can be exhausting. I've actually had some of the women who were in those rooms write to me and say, I love the book. I felt like I was reading my own experience. Thank you. And what I've told them is these were women who I, idolized. Like I would look at them and think, oh, she has got it all figured out. This is who I want to be. And it's just fascinating to realize that, I don't think anybody had it figured out. And I actually think that's true. I've heard from a lot of men from Amazon who've said, obviously the gender stuff I can't experience, but otherwise I feel like you described my life. And I'm like, oh, so maybe nobody had it figured out.
Yeah. I feel like in corporate environments is like, we just pretend a lot and like pretend, tape things together, pretend some more, right? Make some shit, have some success. Go drink.
And then we're like, how did that happen? Well, I've thought a lot about imposter syndrome in my life. And I've come around to the idea that I don't know that overcoming it is a realistic goal for me. But acting in spite of it has gotten me places. Like I've always been like, well, once I get over my imposter syndrome, I'll do X, Y, and Z. And then eventually you're like, okay, well, I'm 53 now. I'm like, how much longer are you going to wait?
Right.
Maybe you should just do the thing while having imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Cause at some point, like to learn and to grow and to expand, like you don't know what you're doing, but you have to like, that's how we learn, right? It's like, you have to be willing to try, and then you learn something, and then you get a little bit more experience, but literally I feel like we're all imposters,
Yeah. And I think that's actually, it's such an important point. I mean, when Amazon's really supportive of people changing roles. And so I went into entirely new industries while I was there, publishing and grocery. I didn't know a thing. I mean, you just don't, but you can, what I tell people is you can learn a lot of that. Like you couldn't just pop into like dentistry.
Right.
No.
That's a hard skill. Yes.
Right. Where you could actually really hurt someone.
Yeah.
But, a lot of those things it's vocabulary and patterns that you learn. If you're a good critical thinker and you're smart and you know how to ask good questions, like you can learn a lot more than you think, but you do have to allow yourself to be, a dummy, right? It's a luxury. You get to ask the dumb questions when you're new. But I do think that in some ways, I mean, I knew men at Amazon who were very powerful. These are like multi-millionaires who have confessed to me, like, I don't know what I'm doing half the time. Like, I'm terrified. I'm about to make a huge mistake. And it's very humanizing to be like, oh.
That's what I feel about parenting.
Yeah, I can imagine, right? No one knows.
Because you've never done it before. Literally, like every step of the way is new. I've got 3 kids, 14, 12, and 10.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, literally every day I'm like, all right, let's put our pants on here and like figure this one out. Cause I don't know. I have nobody leading the way that how we parent now versus when I was a kid to like be a model, like who I can reference back 20 years ago. Be like, how did you handle your, your teenager who is non-gendered and changing their name and dealing with bullying at school? How do you do that? Right.
No.
You have to figure it out on the fly.
It is amazing. I live a block from a high school. And so we have teenagers parking on our street all day, which is like, oh. But I get to watch the teenagers and they're amazing. They're sort of like, when I was a teenager in the 80s, I was like very into new wave music and punk and stuff. And so, but they all kind of look like that now.
Yeah.
Like I was unusual. Now it's like they've all got blue hair and whatever. But they're the gender thing is fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, and this is Seattle, like this is ground zero for having 18 different genders,
right,
but it's really amazing to see, like there are kids every day I see where I legitimately am like, can't tell what sex you were assigned at birth.
Yeah.
And my lizard brain wants to know, my unconscious brain still wants to assign people to one of those buckets.
Yes.
Which I totally forgive myself for, because I'm like, that's
yeah.
For thousands of years, that's how we've operated.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're just like, nope, don't put me in a bucket.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Somehow the pure transness is easier for me to wrap my mind around conceptually than non-binary. Non-binary is where I'm always like, but how, like my brain just doesn't get it, and yet it sounds so freeing.
It is. I think it's complicated. So my oldest is non-binary and born female, and so it's taken me a while to wrap my head around it. But it's like, how gender is. It's not really real. It's right, like, right. So you're like, like just how we're talking, like women are put in this bucket of what we society and our systems think that they're capable of. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you hear the word female or women, you automatically put into this unconscious bucket, right?
Limit, victimized.
Yeah. So they're just removing those walls.
Yeah. Which is
it's fantastic. It is fantastic. Yeah. And it's fucking complicated going up against society and a systems, just like, all these things that we're talking about, and saying, no, this is who I am constantly. Right. You're like, think about being a female and saying, no, but this is what I'm capable of. This is what I've done, and proving yourself and defending yourself all the time. Right. So they have that even twice as hard, because they're now saying what you're saying it's not even real. It's so complicated.
It's kind of like how race kind of isn't. Yes. These are all these weird.
Yeah.
It's just very strange, and gender is such a construct. And in my generation, it was all about saying, no, girls can do these things. Right. Girls can be athletes. Yeah. But now it's just sort of saying like, but what if girl is not a thing?
Right.
Yeah. It just blows my mind. It makes me feel like when I was 18 and like very stoned, just like, what if there were no national boundaries?
Right. It's just like, it's like this, it's meta, right? It's like,
it's so meta. I'm just like, I don't know if I'll ever get used to the idea, but I thoroughly approve. And I also think it's great that these kids are just, I mean, my sense is some of these kids, once they're 30, they'll probably be agender again. You know what I mean? Like,
no, and it's so fluid. It changes all the time. That's what I keep saying. It's like, don't attach yourself to this identity because you don't want an identity. Like,
exactly,
just be you. Just be your name. Like, just whatever. Like, you don't need to decide what all this looks like. It won't matter in 5 years. It'll be different.
Right.
Yeah.
You'll keep changing, and you're never gonna stop changing. Yeah. People, I think when I was that age, I thought by the time you were 30, you were set in stone. And that's kind of one thing that led me to overdrink, I think, is that I really felt like, oh, well, this is me now. Like there's nothing else. And like, that's ridiculous. I hope to live, healthfully into my 90s, and I imagine I'll still be changing.
I talk to my clients a lot about that. It's like we have goals and these pursuits in our lives of like, the traditional way of like, you go to college, you get a job, you might have a family, you buy a house, but then like once you meet all those things, it's like you're fucking 25, 30 years old, right? Yeah. And then it's like, now what? And you have decades and decades left. And so you don't pursue anything or any more growth after that. And then we get stagnant, right? And then we get overworked and burn out and drink and escape and all the stuff.
And I think for women who are mothers, at least anecdotally, it seems too that then when you have the empty nest, it can be a lot, because this focus is suddenly not there. And sometimes you're like meeting your husband again for the first time.
Yeah. You don't know who you are because you've been caretaking and working and schlepping for years and years. And then now all of a sudden it's like, okay, now what? Like, and you don't even know what you like to do besides drink wine.
Right. Exactly. Which is always for you.
Right.
Yeah. It's really scary. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I wanted to touch on was the book, when Mitch, and I don't even know if this, I assume that these are all not their names.
Oh yeah, I gave them all fake names.
Yeah.
Except for Jeff Bezos, because that would have just been weird to give him a fake name. Jeff Bezos.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like, people know who that is.
Yeah, yeah. When you're going in there and he's asking you questions, and he says you're stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for listeners, I had presented a proposal, a huge proposal that had gone very well with other executives, and we presented it to this guy, and he just was like, well, this is stupid and you're stupid. And it's the only time anyone at work has ever just called me stupid.
Yeah.
And it was such a shock to me. There's a way to get, like, Amazon is a very direct place. You can get very blunt feedback, but and that can be hard, but there's ways to do it that are still respectful of someone's humanity. But this guy just, and this is someone who could buy and sell both of us multiple times over. I mean, he was probably the third person from the top of Amazon, and I just, I was so, it's that thing when you can't cry in a meeting. It's like when you can't laugh in church and suddenly it's, and like, I was just, it just ruined me. I mean, it just was such a shock. And at the same time, I was so furious. I think my anger has always kind of saved me, because I didn't think for a moment that I was a stupid person.
Right.
I had worked on this proposal for a year. It had been met with, some feedback, but also a lot of enthusiasm from many, many people. So I had this foundation of like, no, this is a good idea. And even if he doesn't think it's a good idea, he has other ways he could be saying that.
Yeah.
And so I was sitting there and I was just furious, thinking, your one job as a senior executive in this company is really to teach the rest of us. And this, like, that is your job as a boss. When I was a boss, I was like, my job is largely, it's to remove obstacles and to teach. And I was like, you're not teaching, like, you're not teaching me. Because you don't,
and to create a space for innovation and creativity to come through, especially in technology. I mean, it's insane.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to be comfortable. And this is something Amazon is in many ways very comfortable with failure. They have the cash flow to take on these crazy sounding projects that might not work out and be like, well, let's try it and see what we learn. And so, yeah, you really can't in any kind of innovative workspace, you certainly can't ever be calling the people stupid. And I also think stupid is just, it's not a helpful word for an idea.
I mean, is he 10? Like, what the fuck?
Right.
It's just so childish and immature and terribly toxic, right?
It was terrible. I just remember thinking, like, you're like a baby. Like, he was just like this
little brat baby,
crabby 4-year-old. And I could never get away with acting like that. I mean, can you imagine it?
No, you probably get fired.
Certainly wanted to.
Yeah, like, you probably have no innate desire to call somebody stupid, right?
No,
but like,
I've certainly wanted to blow my stack, and you just can't. I mean, I've wanted to, tip over a conference table.
Yeah,
you cannot do that, and for good reasons. And so to me, it was just this incredible display of just childishness, and so it was he immediately became profoundly untrustworthy in my view. Not just because it was directed at me, but because I thought this is someone who can't control his impatience or his emotions. And a lot of people said to me, well, did he ever apologize? No. and I honestly think it's because that was probably common enough for him that I doubt he remembered 5 days later.
Yeah.
I mean, I ran into him at a happy hour a couple of months after that, and he greeted me, oh, hi, how are you? And we had a little chit chat. And I remember thinking, like, does he remember? And I thought, I bet he doesn't remember.
No, because it didn't feel the same way for him as it did for you, right?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And it was just another day in the life for him. And I have been curious. I'm like, I happen to know through the grapevine, like, a lot of senior people at Amazon are reading the book, and he's not there anymore, but I'm like, is he going to read it? And will he recognize himself? Well,
I wish we could call him out, but
I know.
Like, yeah, fucking here, like, somebody knows this guy, share this book with him, fucker.
Right.
But so like we talked about this before we started recording, but when you got hired at Amazon, part of the interview
Mm.
process was you had to be self-reflective. Is that tell me what the term of that was?
Yeah, Amazon, so they have these leadership principles that they
Mhm.
actually do live by.
Mhm.
And one of them is they value people who are vocally self-critical.
Mhm.
And it basically means when you make a mistake, you sort of say so, and
Mhm.
you think about where you could be stronger, and
Mhm.
you don't hide problems. And I
Mhm.
think it's actually in balance, it's actually a great thing.
Mhm.
I've seen so many workplaces where everyone's just covering their ass all the time,
Mhm.
and that's no good. But it's very interesting because I had shaky self esteem and was imposter syndrome. So being vocally self critical has never been a problem for me.
Yeah.
And I was actually told on multiple performance reviews that I was, if anything, too vocally self
Mhm.
critical, that I was too willing to follow my sword and blame myself for things. And I
Mhm.
always thought that was really fair feedback,
Mhm.
that I just didn't know how to act on. It was very hard for me to change, even though I was like, you're absolutely right.
Mhm.
I think part of it is women are
Well,
socialized.
that's what I wanna say. It's like it's almost like it was weaponized against you guys. You know,
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
it's in on its own, it sounds, yeah, we should all how do we learn and grow if we can't own our shit, right?
Right. Right.
But when it's abused, like it can be turned against you and it creates this sort of like when I was reading this, I'm like, this feels like a cult. It feels like you've been conditioned to believe that everything is your fault. And then as women, there's that layer. And
Yeah.
then when somebody says something like this to you,
Hmm.
I know that you like it came through in the book, like you didn't believe that that was your fault or anything, but it's like, how did that become acceptable? Even for
Right.
anybody, you know what I mean? So
Oh, yeah.
elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, they also have a principle that's, I can't remember what it's called, but basically, Amazon really values dissent. Um,
Mm.
and blunt communication, direct communication. And
Mhm.
it's, again, in theory, this is fine. Like, let's just say what we mean instead of tiptoeing around it.
Yeah.
But and a lot of people handle it very well. It was a more direct style that I was used to, but you adapt. But when someone, again, that doesn't mean you call people stupid. Like, you're
Right.
supposed to be respectful of them and focus on ideas, not
Yeah.
people. And so weaponized. And I've seen, just the same way that I think I was criticized for being vocally self critical as a woman, I had girlfriends who were just naturally blunter people than I was,
Mhm.
who kind of got in trouble for being blunt, in a
Again.
way that a
Yeah.
man wouldn't have.
Yeah.
They're abrasive,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's for me when I was reading that, I'm like, I would just quit right then and there. But then I
yeah,
pull back from that. I'm like, but you've been in it now for years, right? So you've been
yeah,
conditioned, even though you're very aware and you're aware of the toxic systems and
mhm.
where you lie in that, there's still a conditioning that's been happening,
Oh
right?
yeah,
And you also wanted the promotions
oh
and
yeah,
to go to the
yeah.
next level. So it's like, like you make it you
You're
just
just
tolerate
stuck.
and tolerate and tolerate, and then something big like this happens and you wrote in the book, like, you scratch yourself or something like that, and I'm just like,
Yeah, it was like like a self, like an almost self
yeah,
mutilation sort of thing, just
yeah,
to, as like
feel
an
that
outlet.
instead of, like, the shame that would have been associated with that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I there is a friend said in a magazine article about Amazon that it's where overachievers go to feel bad about themselves.
Jesus.
It's so true, and I mean this
So
crosses
awful.
genders. It's people who just love to overachieve, and you get to this place where it's really impossible to overachieve at Amazon. There's
Mhm.
always more they want. And a lot of my bosses and coworkers were really good, kind people.
Mhm.
It's not the individual so much as it's just the system.
Mhm.
More, and not a lot of like thank you, not a lot of recognition.
Yeah.
Um, they pay you a lot of money, and
Mhm.
that's certainly is a form of recognition. But
Mhm.
it doesn't mean you don't also want to hear like, "Hey, nice job," you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So and I stayed for 12 years, which is most people there last less than two. So
Mhm.
I was by halfway through, I genuinely thought I would not be employable
I
anywhere
kn
else in the
that's why
world.
I'm like, is that the culty atmosphere? That's because they tell you, they're not,
Mhm.
you don't have the skills that you can take to another techno like, do they actually
Yeah.
say that to you?
They don't, but they kind of they don't really talk about it, about people going elsewhere.
Mhm.
People do all the time. It's people leave for other companies, and people do often bounce back to Amazon enough
Mhm.
that they call them boomerangs. Like we have a
Mhm.
name for it. Because the thing about Amazon is it is a fascinating place to work.
Mhm.
Like it is abusive, it's toxic, it's also incredibly exhilarating because
Mhm.
you get to do these crazy sounding projects and the people are brilliant, and it's
Mhm.
the creativity really soars, and so people will be like, yeah, I didn't find that at Microsoft or something,
Mhm.
so I'm
Mhm.
back for more of this insanity. But they do sort of beat you down so much that you end up thinking, well, I'm not going to make it anywhere
Yeah, you
else. Like I'm
question
not
your
gonna,
own insight and your own knowing. Like that was a
yeah,
theme that you had throughout the book was like you had these internal feelings and thoughts, but that you quickly like gaslit yourself or were
yeah,
gaslit, and then
yeah,
you numb with the alcohol, and then you
mhm,
keep going, you get the money, and then you get used to the money, and then you're like, I can keep
right.
going, and then all of a sudden it's like 10 years in, you
Yeah,
know?
and you're just like, "What happened?" And
Yeah.
that's the thing about the money too, is that once you've been making that kind of money for a while, it doesn't seem strange anymore. You're just
Yeah,
like, "Well,
that's just life. Yeah.
this is how much money I need."
Right.
Um, and money solves a lot of problems. Like
Mhm.
I would never down talk money, but it's you just start to think this is your baseline.
Right.
And then the time is gone, and then you have been out of the workforce for a long time.
Mhm.
You don't necessarily know what it's like, and there were rumors in Seattle that other companies were sometimes hesitant to hire former Amazonians because they were assholes.
Yeah.
um, they come like, and I think this is a very male kind of product manager who would leave Amazon, go to Nordstrom or Starbucks, and come in like a bull in a china shop, wanting
Mhm.
to change everything. So
Mhm.
I remember talking to some headhunters at one point, and I would always have to find the right way to insert into the conversation. By the way,
Mhm.
just to like let them know that I wasn't a jerk.
Yeah.
And like I know that there's this reputation, and by that point we'd been talking for half an hour, and they would say, no, I can tell. But
Yeah.
some of them would say, well, thank you, because that is something that we worry about, just that
Yeah.
these alpha males would come barging in and be arrogant.
Yeah, because 'cause they're never told, like, that they can't behave that way, you know?
Right,
Yeah.
like somebody needed to be like, no,
Yeah. How
cut
are
the
you on
corner.
time, by the way?
I'm good.
Okay, good. Because I have a
Yeah,
couple more questions. I know it's going very long, but I feel like it's important, so
yeah. No, I'm good.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that had to have been a very painful thing to write about, so
It was hard. It took me 4 years, so
yeah.
I'm glad it's done.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so the fear that was in Amazon, so, like, I think talking about the money and people's, people like you that come in, they want this, career trajectory, right? And they're willing to do whatever it takes to get there and they like the money. So like do you think the fear was just this also like this systemic thing that existed there that like you knew if you spoke up because it did happen to you in the end, right? Like you started having
Mhm.
boundaries and saying no to shit and then
Yeah,
you fucking
people were
get
like, "What?"
I don't
Yeah.
remember what the phrase was, but like you got another manager put in front of you or something.
I got, what they
Layered.
call layered,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And so like that's legit. Like it's a legitimate
Mhm.
fear that if you don't fall in line, that you're gonna
Yeah,
lose it all, right?
yeah. There is so much fear there, and I sensed it from even the day of my interview, even the
Mhm.
first day. There's just this sense of people are frantic,
Yeah.
and they're trying to hold it together. They're mostly very nice,
Mhm.
decent people, but they're just like they're panicked just under the surface. And I think a lot of it is honestly that the volume of work is just absolutely over the top.
Yeah.
Everybody has what I would consider at least two full-time normal jobs as their regular job.
Mhm.
And so there's just this terror that's under the surface all the time. And I think there is this sense that it could all fall apart
Yeah.
at any second. Now, Amazon, like all companies, like people don't just get fired on the drop of a hat. Like
Mhm.
there are processes and
Mhm.
there's legal requirements and all
Mhm.
that. But there was this. thing they did every year, which a lot of big companies do, called basically rank and yank. So
So
you
awful.
would rank all your employees,
Yeah.
and it was expected that 10% would fall into the bottom bucket.
Wow.
And those people needed to be managed out. Now, there's always people in that bottom bucket who you're like, yeah, it's just not working. But you get to the point where there were really good people who got put into that bucket just because they weren't as stratospherically talented as the next person, but it's a terrible way to run a business, because if everybody in your band wants to be the lead singer, you have a problem.
Right.
You need your backing vocalists, you need
Right.
your bench people. And eventually the company backed away from this method of doing things, but it was so destructive. And to think, like, if I'm merely very good at my job and reliable and productive, that's not enough for Amazon.
Yeah.
That's a really scary way to live, because nobody can be, even superstars can't be on their A game all the time.
Right. You run out of energy, right?
Yeah.
And it's just not healthy or sustainable. So
It isn't. And I think that Amazon is starting to, I know with warehouse workers, which is a whole different ball of wax, like there was reporting recently that they're worried they might actually run out of people who are willing to work at Amazon.
Yeah.
They could literally run out of employees. And with corporate, I don't think, I don't know that that's going to happen, but I do think more and more people I know anecdotally are like, yeah, I won't even take their phone call because I've heard too many horrible stories.
Yeah.
And so it's not a great way to run your business, to make it so that people can't be human.
Right. Especially when you rely on humans to run the business. So
right. It's going to come back and bite you at some point. And also, those people all have family and friends who you want to be Amazon customers. And, so your employees are also your PR, really.
Right. Yeah. I just thought it was so interesting. Before I have my own business for, 5 years or so ago, and even before that, I did pharmaceutical sales for a long time. So I,
that's high pressure.
Yeah, high pressure in the Seattle area, San Francisco, schlepping all my little drugs and samples around in high heels and doing all the things, And then I went in-house and did marketing and advertising for healthcare agencies.
Okay.
And, I experienced terrible stress and was paid significantly less than my male counterparts. $30,000 less, which when you're only paid $55,000.
Right. It's a lot.
It's a lot, right? And, I had lots of experience and I was bringing in all the big accounts and making sales and things. And then it's just so you're scared. I was so scared to go ask for a raise that I never did, and then I ended up leaving. Right? Because I couldn't make myself go in there and say what I need to say, or say no to some things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then you think, well, they'll get rid of me. Well, and there's data now. We always say women don't get paid because they don't negotiate. That's not true. There was a Harvard Business Review study showing that when women do negotiate, they're penalized for it. So it's not just that women don't ask for the raise. It's that when they ask for the raise, they get in trouble.
Right. Well, there's negotiating when you first get the job, right? And then there's the realization, I think you even wrote about it in your book, about how you recognize somebody that was under you.
Oh, yeah.
Was
the
making
guy who was under me was making $40,000 a year more than I was that year,
right?
At least.
Right. Yeah. And so then you realize these things, and then you're like, do you say something? Because you've been taught that it's not safe to fucking say anything, because you could lose your job. This is a real fear, right?
Or that we don't talk about money, or we don't. Well, in corporations, it's really, I think some states are passing laws now where you have to share salary information.
Yeah.
But corporations don't want us talking about this stuff.
No, when I was in pharmaceutical sales, it was literally you were told, do not tell people what you make. If you are caught doing that, you're going to get in trouble. So yeah.
And it's why don't you want me doing that?
Right. Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's just the fear thing runs so deep and really drives a lot of that action, just burning yourself down. You were getting injured and,
and I had taken up running, and I mean, it was me being an idiot, which it's Amazon both drove and also this played into my Amazon performance. But, I had a little twinge in my shin and I was like, oh, well, the thing to do clearly is to keep running through this. And, and then it really hurt. And then it ended up with a stress fracture. I mean, I did this for months and that's who I was. Someone who would have like severe pain in her shin and think, well, clearly the way to fix this is not to rest, is to just keep running.
Just keep going. Can't stop.
Yeah. Like somebody should have just bonked me on the head with something heavy.
I don't think that would have stopped you, but
it might not.
You could ask your husband. Because you also write about when you had the laryngitis and like you still flew and like traveled and like you literally couldn't speak and he couldn't get you to stop.
Yeah, I went to a gala at like the New York Museum of Natural History with like Nobel Prize winners. And I met Edward Albee and like I literally could not speak. I had traveling with laryngitis is like the TSA, they don't like it. They were like, what's something sketchy with this woman? I'm like, no, really, I just have laryngitis. You get on some kind of watch list.
I think the point though is like you wanted it so bad and you were willing to go after it and kill yourself in the process of it, right?
Yeah. Well, and I didn't want to show any weakness. Like I thought, no, what a strong Amazon person would do is go to this gala anyway, even though she is so sick that she can't speak. And it was laryngitis from a stomach flu, by the way, which I had not known could happen. So, I mean, I was weak. I hadn't eaten in days. But I just thought, no, it'll be appreciated if you do this anyway. And I think, the system does this, but also I did that to myself. Like nobody at Amazon would have thought less of me for a moment. If I had said, I've had a hideous stomach flu, I have laryngitis, I can't go to this gala. I can't put that on the system. Like that would have been like, well, of course she can't go. But I wouldn't say no.
But I mean, I think they play into each other, like it's something in you that you believed, right? Or conditioned to believe that you needed to do whatever it took to get there, like, were you naturally born with that drive?
It's interesting. I wonder sometimes if I was, I mean, I do think I was born with some drive. But I also, I think growing up in the 70s and 80s, the message for girls was you can get what boys and men have as long as you're even better than they are. And so, which is not true. You're still not going to get what they have. So I just set my mind to it that I just have to be better and more on top of things and more competent than they are. And so I think from, relatively early childhood, I just decided that's who I would be. And, I had no recognition that there were systemic inequalities. Just individual men that I had to be better than.
It's hard. It's hard to face up to that and like see it for what it is. It's like, was it like, because I have a big drive too, and I can, similar to you, like wanted to climb and climb and climb, and even running my own business, like I have to like really watch that, otherwise I can really burn myself out. But I just wonder, like, is it because I have something to prove, or because I was told that I couldn't? Or
that was always a thing for me.
Like I'm such a rebel that I'm just like, just watch me do it anyway, I
mean, someone could tell me something incredibly stupid to do and say, I don't think you could do that. And I'd be like, I'm going to do it. I am going to jump off that building. Because you said I can't. My father always said that. I have a younger sister, and he said, when we would try to set boundaries with her, she would argue with us all day long. When we would do it with you, you would just nod and smile pleasantly and then do whatever the hell you wanted.
You knew how to play the game. I never thought of myself
that way, but I was like, I guess I am that way. But I am, and I think ambition is a great thing. I mean, I think that a lot of great advances in the world probably happened because somebody had something to prove. Penicillin, maybe it was like, I need to prove this. But it's when you don't know why. And what happened to me, I think, was like, I was so ambitious and I no longer knew why. And that's when it starts to become, like burnout or just senseless. Like, like, what are you doing this for? that's the question. Because I think female ambition, which we tend to trash, it gets trashed a lot, is a wonderful thing. Like, I want to know women who are like, I want to change the world. I want to do big things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just interesting. Like, at what part does our conditioning play into it, or our inherent drive as a unique individual? And it's like we don't know. I don't really think we could ever really know, like, what it is. Yeah.
I mean, my father was extremely driven. Like, he had 2 PhDs, and he was, a workaholic probably. But I also got this lesson from him that work could be a passion. That it could be something that really engaged you intellectually, that you loved. And so I am so thankful for that. Yeah. It was never like, well, you got to have some kind of job. Yeah. It was like, no, it's something that you're great at and everything. So, and then I know I was an obsessive, like, A student, like, really terrified of failure. And I don't know where it came from. Yeah. It's probably buried hundreds of years in, like, my family history.
Yeah, it could be like an ancestral thing. Yeah.
In the Civil War, something happened, in Alabama where my family lived, and now we all feel like we have to. I don't know.
Yeah. For me, I was the first female to go to college, so I didn't have that influence at all. And so I'm like, how did I even get here? I mean, like, my life now looks just completely different than anything that anybody ever expected,
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, it's just so interesting, like, where people go and what drives them, and learning about conditioning and our systems and all the different obstacles that people have to overcome. Yeah.
One thing for me, it's funny when you said that, it made me realize, so my dad's side of the family, everybody he and his brothers all have PhDs in the sciences, and they've all spent their entire career mostly in academia, but in hard sciences. And I have 2 English degrees. Almost all my cousins became scientists. So there is this part of me, I think, that wanted to prove that, yes, I may have gone and just read books for 8 years, but I too can, I can make a living, and I can be great at things. And so I think there was something in me. No one ever tried to shame me for not being a scientist. I think it was pretty clear early on that I did not have that. That's not my skill set.
Well, in the book you write, like, oh, your dad would make comments like, I'm not going to support a struggling writer or something like that. And you're like, you entered the essay contest or things, and you, like, start making money, like, at a young age. And you're like, doesn't seem that hard.
I was like, this is easy, because I was stupid. But I was like, this is great. I got $20 from B'nai B'rith for this thing, But my dad would always say, well, I'm not going to support you. And I'm actually really proud that, like, my parents, once I was through school, like, they did a couple nice things. Like, my dad gave us some stock to help us with the down payment on a house, but, like, I never had to have help paying my rent. I always just got it done. And that's always, I'm like, that was hard. Like, you were you had 2 English degrees, and you somehow earned a living, not as a writer, mind you, but I just took work. And I do think I felt like I had something to prove. And at Amazon, I didn't have an MBA like a lot of people. And I think also, I mean, you don't really need one. I mean, it can be nice if you're young and you want to go into business, sure, but it's like, you don't really need an MBA. But I think I wanted to prove that I wasn't just the squishy headed, liberal arts major. And to even say that is kind of silly, because liberal arts teach you how to think. They teach you how to reason, how to evaluate sources. I mean, like, it's actually can be a pretty rigorous education, but the stereotype is that
it's not like a hard skill that you have that you can, although what you did at Amazon was pretty hard skilled. Like, I mean, they needed you for all the work that you did there. Yeah.
They did. That was the great thing, is that it turned out there were spaces for me in Amazon. And a lot of it, I was never going to be the kind of quantitative analyst that a lot of people are even half. I mean, like, my Excel skills are abysmal. I just get confused, and then I just give up. But I had this judgment, the ability to measure things, to kind of judge things that couldn't really be measured. And that, anytime you're running like a website with words and images and things on it, that's really important. And that was a rare skill set at Amazon, people who could measure things that you can't necessarily count.
Yeah.
So I was smart enough to realize, oh, here's a gap in the system. And it makes me a little bit weird, but it also means I'll always have a job here as long as I want it, you know? And I always tell young women, like, think about those places where, you know, you can make your own path sometimes. I wrote some of my own job descriptions at Amazon. If you're willing to do that, and your career history will look sort of strange, but it's a way to make your career work for you versus instead of putting yourself in these weird little slots. The times I had normal sounding jobs were like the times that I was least happy and that I achieved the least, you know.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I'm going to make my own.
Yes. So, we talked about, I think you didn't talk about drinking a lot, but we can touch on it because you've got this whole other amazing book that everybody should also buy. Right. But I think what was interesting to me is, like, you know, you mentioned it, you know, pretty far into your career in Amazon, you very openly recognize, like, I'm thinking about alcohol a lot. You know, I recognize I have a job that makes me want to drink. Like, I think after you stopped drinking, you really got clear on that.
I drank for like half my Amazon career and I was sober for the second half. Like, it ended up being this perfect little A/B test. And when I quit, I quit for a lot of reasons, but I kept telling myself, oh, if I quit, I'll nail this job. I was in a particular role that was just impossible. And like 6 months later, I was like, it's not just me. Like, this job is undoable and I'm not the right person for it. And it was like it was a great moment of clarity that sobriety allowed me to have, to realize not only do I hate this job, but also I'm not the right person for this job. Like, I had to be humble and realize that I was never going to be great at the job. And that I ended up, you know, finding a new role at Amazon and transferring. But like, that was hard to do. It was hard to say, because that felt like failure.
Yeah.
And I think without being sober, I don't think I would have been able to say, well, if it looks like failure, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to be happier and you're going to stay sober. Like, because that's what it came down to, is if you stay in this job, staying sober is just going to be such a white knuckle experience.
Right. Yeah.
Because it sucks.
Yes. And if you would have kept drinking through that, what do you think would have happened? Certainly this book wouldn't be here, right?
Well, no, the book wouldn't be here. It'd probably still be at Amazon. You know, I think I was the kind of drinker. It wasn't like I was going to suddenly land in the hospital. But my ambition was shrinking and shrinking. Like, my world was becoming just worry about work and worry about drinking, and then work and drinking. I mean, those were the four components. And I don't know. It's hard to imagine. It's been 10 years since I've had a drink. So when I was done, I was done. That was it.
Yeah.
But I had no ambition. I think I'd still be defining myself by a particular job I was in at the moment, desperate for the next one, the next level, and I wouldn't be writing, which is the only thing I really wanted to do since I was 4 years old. You know, I wanted to write, and I took 12 years away from writing.
Yeah.
And it was only when I got sober that I came back to it.
So good.
That's the closest thing I have to a purpose in life, where I feel it in my bones. And I would not be fulfilling my purpose, because writing takes stamina. And as a drinker, I did not have stamina.
Yeah. Well, I think alcohol steals your desire, right?
Yeah.
All of your desire goes towards that, fulfilling the need to drink, right? And so we only have a limited amount of this beautiful thing of desire, ambition, whatever, right?
Right.
And
there's so many hours in the day. There's only so much energy.
Yeah.
And I would worry about it so much. I mean, I really did. I was Googling the phrase "tired of thinking about drinking."
Yeah.
Because I wanted to find a way to stop thinking about drinking. And I did that for like 6 months before I thought, you know, one way would be to stop drinking.
Yeah. Didn't you say that you tried stopping thinking about drinking, but you didn't stop the drinking? So you just like ignored the thinking about it.
Totally.
Like, let me try this.
Like, well, I'll just stop. You know, if I can just stop worrying about the drinking, I need to get over my anxiety about the drinking. And it's like, it just kept not working.
Right.
And eventually I was like, well, if I stop drinking, that I wouldn't have to be anxious about drinking.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's a terrible idea. It's clearly not going to work. And, I got to that some point. I couldn't say why it was the day it was, when I thought, okay, I give. Like, I cry uncle.
Yeah.
But I always thought, once I get ahead of my anxiety, I'll quit drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was that I had to quit drinking to get ahead of my anxiety.
Yeah, because it's like throwing gasoline on the fire.
Yeah. And I didn't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ever really think. I had read the stuff about the physiological complications of alcohol, and I somehow didn't think they applied to me personally. Mm. It's like I was special. My body worked differently than other people's body. Yeah. Which I think is classic alcoholic thinking,
Yeah, I think it's just like, when I didn't know any of this shit when I was still drinking. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't until I stopped and started working on my shit that I learned all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm, so I wouldn't even be able to tell you that I was drinking from my anxiety. Like, I didn't even have that language to attach to it. What I thought was like, I just need to take the edge off of this. It's too much. I can't handle it all. That's what I thought. Right. I didn't know that I was medicating myself to take the edge of the anxiety off, right? Yeah. So I think it's hard to see that. Like, when somebody would say, yo, it's like throwing your gas, you're like, what? That doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, like, what does that mean? No. Yeah. I started to develop that language, I think, just because I tortured myself with drinking for so long. That I started to, like, I was reading things and starting to understand. And then it was just a matter of, am I actually going to stop? Yeah. Because it just seemed like an unfathomable loss. And it was a loss.
It was a loss. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really, really hard at first. But then probably within a few weeks, I was like, well, I actually feel better.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't think this was going to
happen. It's a temporary, discomfort obviously you've written 2 books, you're not working at Amazon anymore, you're fulfilling your purpose more. You probably are less stressed, I would imagine.
Yeah. I'm stressed over different things, I still have anxiety issues. I think I always have my whole life. Like, it's not like I became a different person, but but I have the sense of myself that I never did before. And I feel much more free. I have a lot more fun.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I didn't expect that. I thought it would just be a life of, like, I don't know, I pictured like Marmee in Little Women, that I would just be very virtuous. And I love Marmee, but like, she's very upright. I thought that would be me, and I would just learn to like it. And like, no, I'm not like that at all.
Yeah.
I could stand to be more like her, probably.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think it's, my goal, because I always considered myself a fun person, when I was drinking. And I thought people that didn't drink weren't fun. Like, really, I thought that was the truth, like the law, like, that seriously, like, people that don't drink are not fun. I'm not friends with them. Who are they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I made it my mission to just be fun and not drink, and so I'm like, I have way more adventures and fun now.
Oh yeah. You can actually take like calculated risks now and do silly things that you couldn't do if you were drinking. Yeah. And when I quit, I was still working at Amazon, which is a very boozy workplace. But so I would go to these happy hours, and I would just find myself on the edges of the crowd. And it turns out there's like a lot of people who don't drink in the world.
And they're fun, turns out.
Yeah, and they're fun. At Amazon, there were a lot of people in the tech side from India, who grew up Muslim sometimes and just had literally never had a drink in their lives. And or people, there are a lot of Mormons at Amazon.
Yeah.
Because Utah is kind of near Seattle. Who knows why? But I'd be like, oh, and it turns out like they were just fun people. And it had never occurred to me that there were people who just don't drink.
Yeah.
I was like, you either drink or you're in recovery because something terrible happened. The idea that you just might not drink had never occurred to me. And there were Asian people who said, oh yeah, if I drink, there's this flushing condition that a lot of Asian people get, it's where like they turn like really hot and red. Yeah. They're like, I just can't because it's horrible. And I was like, and it was very humbling to realize that, like, there's this whole world there that I was just ignoring.
Yeah. Same.
People I could talk to.
Yeah. It was good.
I was like, oh,
so do you think that you always had this underlying issue with alcohol, or do you feel like the toxic workplace at Amazon really did that to you?
I think it was always there. I remember reading Drinking a Love Story came out when I was probably 24, 25. and I read it. It's a beautiful book. And I remember thinking like, oh, I identify with this very strongly. When she would write about, always monitoring the level of wine in the bottle and wishing other people would drink faster so she could refill her glass. I was like, ding, ding, ding. And then I just put that aside for another, almost 15 years. I definitely always had it. My parents, I didn't realize this was strange until like 5 years ago, but my parents drank every night.
Okay.
They were quiet drinkers. It wasn't like some sort of like party house. So I didn't make the connection. And I was 5 years sober before I was like, drinking every night is not really normal.
Yeah, the same with me. So my parents would be classified as alcoholics. They still drink heavily. And that's how I grew up. And it wasn't great, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize until like 3 years after I stopped drinking that influenced my drinking. Isn't that wild?
Right.
And I'm like, oh, like that's the conditioning. Again, like this conditioning, like I was implicitly taught that this is what you do. This is how you handle stress. This is, you deserve it after a long day. You're not hurting anybody if you're drinking at home, and people who aren't drink are boring, and they need to have a drink to loosen up, and all the things. Like I learned that from a very young age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And same. It was like, well, at night we watched TV and my father would have his Southern Comfort. My mother would have her wine with ice in it. It was the 70s. And somehow I didn't associate that with problem drinking, because it was just what I knew.
Yeah.
And, my mom was one of those moms who was like, well, I'd rather have you drinking at home than out. So she would buy beer for me and my friends when we were, when I was a teenager, and she was the cool mom. And, it's not that any of it's her fault. Like, I think this would have happened no matter what. But yeah, my messages about alcohol were definitely that it's just a part of your day.
Yeah.
It's just what you do.
Yeah.
And, but Amazon definitely, I think, like pouring gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
That kind of stress, and also just being in a place where there was booze everywhere. Like people would just keep a bottle of like scotch on their desks, and at 6 they'd have a belt of scotch, and then they get back to work.
Yeah.
That certainly didn't help. That it seemed glamorous, and I also I got really into wine. That was my drink of choice.
Yeah.
And wine, like, you can fool yourself with wine.
Absolutely.
It's pretty. Like, well, it's an art.
Yeah. You get into it, and you get the wine club memberships, and you go wine tasting, and all that bullshit.
It's like, and like, it is an art. Like, I get that, but I was definitely drinking to get drunk. And I had myself convinced that, no, I want to understand these different subtleties. And you can do that with scotch. I mean, almost any liquor. Like, I went to a tequila bar in Mexico once. It had like 125 tequilas. Like,
wow.
Anything. It can become like the thing that you're going to become obsessive about. So that, and it's considered like a high achieving, fancy person thing to do. I mean, it's almost like someone once said to me, if a woman of color had written about drinking the way that you did, nobody would think it was cute. The way that you went to fancy bars and fancy wine tastings, and you had this like high paying job. And I was like, no, you're absolutely right. Like, it would be, especially someone who wasn't in that economic class, like it would be seen as embarrassing or shameful or something.
Yeah. Or just replace it with, whiskey, right?
Right.
Like whiskey during the day and at brunch and at night. And for all the reasons, it's like whiskey. It's like, people would question that.
Vodka.
Yeah.
But, or and even smoking pot, like 8 times a day or something. Yeah. It's just no longer cute and sexy, and like, I thought it was feminist, to be like, I can drink like a man.
Absolutely. That was for me too. It was like it was being attractive for the opposite sex.
Right.
So like there's so many fucking layers to it, but like I didn't realize any of this either until later, of course. But it's like, I put this identity on myself, to make me look cooler.
Girl.
Cooler, sophisticated, sexy, all this shit. And it's such bullshit. Yeah.
It's like in the 90s when the cigar, everybody was doing whiskey and cigars. And so it was this thing to be like, a woman who smokes cigars made you cool.
Yeah.
And it's like, ew, I still, like, thank God I was like no, I'm going to that's gross. But, or I drink martinis because I can drink like a man. And, when I read and then saw Gone Girl, like that cool girl monologue really spoke to me. I was like, that is who I've been my entire life.
Yeah.
Been trying to be the cool girl who can be like a man and put up with men's shit and just never be bothered by it because I'm a cool girl.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm not a cool girl.
Yeah. And I don't want to be that cool girl anymore.
No,
like, she's
I
actually
still
not
have to
that
yank
cool.
myself out of it. I still catch myself doing it, but I was like, no, it's no good. Like that, I think that's like one of the great moments in literature in like the last, 20 years, honestly, because it spoke to so many people and like woke so many women up.
Yeah.
When I heard the monologue in Barbie, I was kind of like, oh my God, it's like the cool girl monologue all over again.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah.
Well, those are my biggest talking points I had. I know that we went really long, but thank you. And I just got to tell you that your ending scene, so as you're writing the ending scene to the book and you're like going for the run and you have all the people coming out and then you're like, and I didn't tell him what Prince song I was listening. I'm like, what is it? And it was like, Get Off and then Pussy Control. And I'm like, yes, yes. I was like cheering you on in the end scene. And like, if it ever gets made into a movie or a documentary or something, like, I really hope that somebody actually puts that to vision for you.
I think that would be great. Well, it was funny. I didn't know how to end the book. And I was like, and the thing about memoir, because the ending is obviously fantasy, like I'm talking to horses and the hammering statue at the art museum. But I was like, you can do this. Like, it's clear to readers that you're lifting off into fantasy. And I just thought I had thought it has to end with an exit interview.
Yeah.
And I didn't get one from Amazon. So I'm going to get it from these winos and horses and policemen and my parents on the streets of Seattle and Jeff Bezos himself. And like that guy, like I would always be listening to just some song that I was like, I can't tell him the name of this song.
I'm so
It was never like Raspberry Beret. It was always just like
Cream.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, no.
Prince is my all-time freaking favorite. He was my like get out of my marriage or like my one free pass always.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I love him.
He's amazing. He played a show in Seattle like I probably in the decade before he died in a club, like a club that holds, I don't know, maybe 500 people.
Yeah.
Of course, I was not cool enough to know about it in advance, so I didn't go. But I guess he just kind of riffed the whole time. Like he didn't play any hits or anything.
Yeah. Well, I saw him in Seattle. It was probably in like 2008 or 2007. It was so good.
He's so amazing. When he died, it was like, I remember that was a day when like even at Amazon, like work just kind of stopped. Yeah. Like everybody was just like, because we were shocked.
Yeah, it was terrible. I was like,
it just came out of.
I know.
And he was just, and then he seemed like he was such a nice man and like weird, but good.
He was good. I know. Poor Prince. Yeah. I'm so glad he got his time in it too. Like he got a good ending in there too. And the book was amazing. And thank you for writing it. And thank you for coming in here and talking about it. And everybody should read it. And
yes.
Are you doing any book tours or anything? Have you done any book tours or have anything planned?
I have done a little bit. Physical book tours don't sell books the way they used to. In this day when a lot of people read on Kindle or things like that. So we kind of do it like rather than doing a tour. It's like when there's a big demand for an event, I do that. But you can do a lot of promotion by podcast these days.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice. I'm just like at my desk doing my thing. Yeah. And but I love getting out there. And like when I do get out on the road, like I always meet women who are like, oh, I quit drinking after I read your first book or something. Yeah. And it's like amazing to meet those people. It's incredible it makes me feel so connected.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that. So hopefully there will be more. I would love to get to the East Coast.
It'd be super cool. Come to Raleigh.
Yeah. Cool. So we'll see.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much again, Kristi.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you for hanging in there through that interview. I hope you found it valuable. I hope that you go buy her book, Exit Interview, The Life and Death of My Ambitious Career. And because you should get both, Nothing Good Can Come From This, her first book. It's just amazing what's possible. If you decide to listen to yourself and stop numbing yourself, to let your inner voice come through and listen to what's right for you and what's not right for you, and to follow that voice. And I'm so glad that Kristi did that so she could write these books and share her stories that are going to be very impactful for women in the workplace and women just in general. So I'm so thankful that she was willing to come on and share that with us. I will link up her website and Instagram and all the things in the show notes. Make sure you check her out, and I will talk to y'all next week. Bye. I want you to check out angelamascenik.com/aliveaf. You know what it's like to have a desire to cut back on your drinking, right? You start to read books, listen to podcasts, try things, but you might not be able to yet put all the pieces and suggestions together in a way that actually makes sense and works for you. You might struggle with beating yourself up after an overdrink. You might get frustrated with yourself when you take 2 steps forward and then another 2 steps back, and get overwhelmed with what's right and wrong about your relationship with alcohol. Your friends tell you that you should be able to have just 1 drink, and it isn't a big deal. You might be white-knuckling through urges and resisting instead of peacefully processing them. And you might struggle with your identity as someone who has enjoyed having a lot of wine or alcohol in your life. It's around you all the time. It's what you do and who you are. Well, after 5 years of successfully coaching hundreds of women through these struggles, I have created the Alive AF membership, where women like you can learn the basics on what it takes to cut back and reach your goals with alcohol, whether it is to just drink less or totally quit. And when you join, you will get the exact framework I used to change my own relationship with alcohol and still use today, that has led me to be alcohol-free for over 5 years. You're going to get access to my resources, videos, and worksheets that have been proven to change and reduce how much you drink. Every day you can ask questions, share your obstacles, and get coaching and direct support on the challenges you will face with love and no judgment. Also, you will get immediate access to workshops like uncovering your alcohol identity and changing it, how to say no to things that don't support your new identity or life or goals, aka boundaries, a workshop called Creating Emotional Agency, and another one, How to Manage Your Mind to Succeed at Your Goals, and more. Every month we have a brand new workshop. These workshops are filled with step-by-step prompts and instruction to help you create the exact relationship with alcohol that is best for you. My mission and vision for Alive AF is to be a hub of support and resources for women to come and learn how to do what is best for them and becoming more alive in the process. When you join, you're going to learn how to take care of yourself better, how to feel good and become more alive and go after the life that you really want. I want this membership to be affordable and an easy solution where you can get all the help you need in one simple place whenever you need it. So, no need to go read another book, find a new podcast, attend a free webinar, or go down the path of piecemealing it all together. Join Alive AF and have it all there in one place for you anytime you need it. So, go to angelamascenik.com/AliveAF, and enrollment is open right now. See you inside.